Right now, there's probably salt within arm's reach of you. Maybe it's on your table, in your kitchen, or already in whatever you're eating. And when you use it, you probably don't think twice about it. You just shake it on, stir it in, and move on with your day. But what you're doing is one of the most fundamental human behaviors that exists. It's older than cities, older than writing, older than metal tools. And unlike most things we eat, salt is the only rock that human beings actively crave. Not kind of want, actually crave at a biological level. Because our relationship with salt doesn't start when someone figured out how to mine it or trade it. It starts millions of years before humans even existed, with animals walking for days across dangerous terrain just to lick stones. In 2007, researchers studying elephants in Mount Elgon, Kenya, documented something extraordinary. These elephants weren't just visiting caves occasionally. They were walking deep into total darkness, sometimes hundreds of meters underground, navigating by memory and touch to reach specific cave walls. And when they got there, they used their tusks to gouge rock and ate them. Not for fun, for the salt. The volcanic rock in those caves contains sodium deposits, and elephants need sodium to survive. Their plant-based diet doesn't provide nearly enough, so they risk injury, predators, and getting lost in the dark just to lick a wall. And they're not alone. Deer, goats, butterflies, parrots, even insects, they all seek out salt. It's hardwired, and our ancestors had the same wiring. Here's the thing. The human body can't produce sodium on its own, but every single cell in your body needs it to function. Your nerve use it to send signals. Your muscles use it to contract. Your brain literally can't think without it. So, when early humans were still hunting and gathering, they had a problem. If you're eating mostly plants, fruits, and roots, you're not getting much sodium. You need another source. And at some point, they figured that out. The question is, when? If you're enjoying this deep dive, hit subscribe. There's a lot more coming. The earliest solid evidence we have for humans deliberately seeking out salt comes from a site in Romania called Poiana Slatinei. In 2012, archaeologists working there found traces of a settlement dating back to around 6050 BCE, over 8,000 years ago. But what made this site special wasn't just the age, it was the location. The settlement was built directly next to a salt spring, a natural source of brine where salty water bubbles up from underground. And when they analyzed the artifacts, they found evidence of boiling. Large ceramic vessels with salt residue inside. These people weren't just using the spring for water. They were boiling the brine to extract pure salt. That's not accidental. That's a process. That's someone figuring out that if you heat salty water long enough, the water evaporates and leaves behind salt crystals. And they were doing this over 8,000 years ago. But here's where it gets interesting. Poiana Slatinei wasn't a random village, it was part of something much bigger. The site sat along what researchers now believe was one of the earliest long-distance trade networks in Europe. Salt from this region has been found at archaeological sites hundreds of kilometers away. Think about that. Over 8,000 years ago, people were transporting salt across massive distances. Not gold, not gemstones, rocks that taste salty. But to them, it was valuable enough to carry for weeks. Now, Romania wasn't the only place this was happening. Around the same time, maybe even earlier, people in northern China were doing the same thing. At a site called Zhongba in what's now Chongqing, archaeologists found ceramic pottery dating back to around 6000 BCE with heavy salt residue. Chemical analysis confirmed it. These vessels were used repeatedly for brine boiling. But the Zhongba site also revealed something else. Workshops. Not just a family boiling a little salt for dinner. This was organized production, multiple households working together to produce salt in large quantities. And that means they weren't just making it for themselves, they were making it to trade. And then there's the Hallstatt salt mine in Austria. If you've never heard of it, you should have because it's one of the most important archaeological sites in Europe. The mine itself has been in operation for over 3,000 years. And when archaeologists started excavating the area in the 1800s, they found something remarkable: an entire Bronze Age civilization built around salt. We're talking about a settlement from around 1200 BCE, where salt wasn't just a commodity, it was everything. The wealth, the power, the entire social structure revolved around controlling the mine. The people who lived there, now called the Hallstatt culture, became rich, stupidly rich. Not because they had fertile land or access to the sea, but because they had salt, and everyone else needed it. Let me explain why salt was so absurdly valuable. It's not just about making food taste better, though it does, it's about preservation. Before refrigeration, if you wanted meat or fish to last longer than a few days, you had exactly two options: dry it or salt it. And salting worked way better. When you pack meat in salt, it draws out moisture and creates an environment where bacteria can't grow. That means food can last for months, even years. So, if you're a society that hunts, fishes, or raises animals, and you want to store food for winter, for travel, or for trade, you need salt. It's not optional. And if you control the salt, you control the food supply. And if you control the food supply, you control everything. This is why the Romans built roads specifically for salt. The Via Salaria, one of the oldest roads in Italy, literally means salt road. It was constructed to transport salt from the coastal salt pans near Ostia into the heart of Rome. And the workers who maintained that road, the soldiers who protected the salt caravans, they were paid in salt rations. In fact, that's where we get the word salary. It comes from salarium, the Latin term for the salt allowance given to Roman soldiers. So, every time you get a paycheck, you're continuing a tradition that started with paying people in actual rocks. And Rome wasn't unique. In ancient China, salt was so valuable that the government controlled its production and taxed it heavily. The revenue from salt taxes funded entire dynasties. In medieval Europe, cities like Venice and Lubeck became powerful trading hubs almost entirely because of their control over salt routes. In Africa, blocks of salt were used as currency. Traders in the Sahara would carry slabs of salt south and exchange them for gold, sometimes literally weight for weight. 1 pound of salt for 1 pound of gold. Let that sink in. People valued salt as much as gold, not because it was shiny, because it kept them alive. But let's go back further, because even before organized mining, before trade networks, before anyone was paying taxes in salt, humans were already eating it. We just had to get creative. Early hunter-gatherers didn't have access to salt mines or coastal salt pans, so they had to find it in their food. And here's the clever part. They learned that blood has salt in it. Animal blood contains sodium. And if you're eating freshly killed game and consuming the organs, especially the liver and kidneys, you're getting a decent amount of sodium. This is one reason why many indigenous hunting cultures around the world traditionally ate organ meats first, often raw, right after a kill. It wasn't just about nutrition, it was about salt. But what if you're not eating much meat? What if you're living inland, far from the ocean, and your diet is mostly plants? Then you need another source, and this is where things like salt springs, natural brine pools, and even certain types of plants come in. There are grasses and herbs that accumulate salt in their tissues, and early humans learned to identify them. Some groups would burn these plants and collect the ash, which was salty. Others would boil the plants down to extract the salt. It's labor-intensive, but when your body is screaming for sodium, you figure it out. In Ethiopia, the Afar people have been harvesting salt from the Danakil Depression for thousands of years. It's one of the hottest, harshest places on Earth. Temperatures regularly hit 50 degrees Celsius, and the ground is covered in salt flats that stretch for miles. But people still go there, cut slabs of salt from the ground, load them onto camels, and transport them across the desert to trade. They've been doing this for so long that researchers believe the Danakil salt trade routes are some of the oldest continuous trade routes still in use. We're talking thousands of years of people walking through one of the most unforgiving landscapes on the planet just to get salt. So here's the full picture. Millions of years ago, your ancestors, along with every other mammal, had a biological craving for sodium. Hunter-gatherers got it from blood, organs, and the occasional salt spring. By 6000 BCE, people in China and Europe were boiling brine and producing salt in workshops. By 1200 BCE, entire civilizations were being built on salt wealth. By the time of the Roman Empire, salt was funding armies, building roads, and creating the concept of a salary. In medieval Europe, it was starting wars. In Africa, it was being traded for gold. And in the modern world, it's so cheap and common that we put it in shakers and forget about it. But for most of human history, salt wasn't cheap. It was survival. It was power. It was wealth. There's a reason it shows up in religious texts, in idioms, in cultural rituals across every continent. The Bible mentions salt over 30 times,